Very similar to Red Jerry and Hooge Tunes, I had no idea about Simon Barry's overall contribution to underground music as both a producer and label head for Platipus Records, so let's get into it. Platipus Records was founded in 1993 by Simon Barry. In his bio on Beatport, we find some awesome information about his origin. He grew up on the countryside, but his interest in electronic music led him to London, where he arrived with the intention of listening to 24-hour pirate radio stations like Energy and Friends FM. He discovered legendary clubs like Troll and Chemistry, where he heard tracks like Hard Floor's Experience that would inspire him to make music on his own. So Simon not only began producing his own records, but he also set up a label, Platipus Records, to release his music under the name Art of Trance and other aliases like Poltergeist. Let's take a look at his first release as Art of Trance, which is the Deeper Than Deep EP, Platipus 001. This release includes Art of Trance's original mix of Deeper Than Deep, 2 additional remixes as the aliases Poltergeist and Third Eye, and then 2 other tracks, Sea of Tranquility and Colossal Cathedral. Simon's next release on Platypus, Platipus 002, would find great success. As Poltergeist, Barry released Vicious Circles, and this record was a true destroyer of dance floors, once heard, never forgotten. This record is so far ahead of the curve considering it was released in 1993, and Barry says that one night he met Darren Emerson, Charlie Hall, and Carl Cox in the club, and all of them were asking for fresh copies of the record as they've worn out their acetates. And I fact-checked this, and I found literal testimonies of Carl Cox dropping this track around the world in 1993. So at the beginning, Platypus kind of looked like a one-man band at its creation. You have the man at the top, Simon Barry, who's releasing music as Art of Trance and Poltergeist, but while Platypus began as a label for Simon Barry to share his own releases, quickly other producers would get involved in projects with Simon. A great example of this is found on Platipus 004, which is the Colors EP by Art of Trance. On this release, we hear a Clanger remix of Colors. Now, Clanger is the duo of Simon Barry and Paul Brogden, better known as the producer P.O.B., who was another pioneering trance producer, as well as the founder of Seismic Records. In addition to Colors, Simon and P.O.B. also collaborated on another Clanger remix for P.O.B.'s Essence. Simon Barry would also work with another friend named Claudio Giussani. Later on, Claudio would release music on Platypus as Terra Firma. But initially, the duo of Claudio and Simon produced music as Union Jack. And in October of 1993, Union Jack released their debut track, 2 Full Moons and a Trout. And a change in the underground music landscape in 1994 would bring their music to an even wider audience, because in 1994 we get the emergence of the Mix compilation. In September of 1994, United DJs of America Volume 1, mixed by Florida's Kimball Collins, is released by DMC. And then 1 month later in October, Renaissance releases Renaissance The Mix Collection, mixed by Sasha and John Digweed. These 2 mixes are some of the first examples of approaching the Mix compilation as its own art form, where the DJ is given the creativity to choose most, if not all, of the tracks in the mix. And both of these mixes, United DJs of America and Renaissance The Mix Collection, include tracks from Simon Barry, Paul Brogden, and Claudio Giussani. Let's start with Kimball Collins' legendary United DJs of America Volume 1, since that released first. To me, much like Danny Tenaglia, Kimball Collins is your favorite DJ's favorite DJ. He's a pioneering DJ in a legendary Florida scene that I'm going to explore further in a future video. But he chose to open up his United DJs of America mix with Casper Pound's remix of Union Jack's 2 Full Moons and a Trout. And a few tracks later, he brings in the Clanger remix of P.O.B.'s Strata. A month later, on Renaissance The Mix Collection, Sasha and John included Paul Brogden's Got Drum mix of Funtopia's Do You Wanna Know. What I'm trying to say is this. Simon Barry was very tapped into the direction that the underground trance sound was headed, and you have to look no further than John Digweed's Renaissance the Mix Collection Part 2. There were 3 CDs included in this release, and on each CD we find a different connection to Platypus. On CD 1, John concludes with Simon Barry and Paul Brogdon's Klenger remix of Essence. And then on CD 2, John Digweed includes the track Anomaly, Calling Your Name, by Libra Presents Taylor, which was the 24th release on Platypus. And it's interesting to point out that Libra was actually Brian Transeau, or BT, working with Taylor, aka Miles Wooten. And a side note about this track is that it was included on the American Pie soundtrack randomly enough. But back to Renaissance the Mix Collection Part 2, because on the 3rd CD, John Digweed's second to last track is none other than the dream mix of Robert Miles's Children, which is one of the biggest trance tracks in history and was signed to Platypus for the UK release. Children was first released in Italy in January 1995 on Joe Vanelli's DBX label, but it didn't chart or anything. The story goes that Vanelli brought the track to a nightclub in Miami where it was heard by Simon Barry of Platipus Records. But according to Chris Fortier, what actually happened was that Vanelli gave an acetate of Children to Kimball Collins, and Kimball played it exclusively at Firestone in Orlando, and it was there where Simon Barry heard it and would sign it to Platypus for additional distribution. As mentioned, Children was the 18th release on Platypus, and in my opinion this marks a change from Platypus really showcasing Simon Barry, Paul Brogdon, and Claudio Giussani to a wider range of producers. Of course you had masterpieces like Floating by Claudio Giussani's alias Terra Firma, but you also had BT and Taylor on Anomaly, Calling Your Name. Quiet Man, who was the duo of Lawrence Elliott Potter and Will Frost on Plastic Gourd and Now in Zen, and Oliver Lieb as LSG with Hidden Son of Venus. All the while, Simon Barry remained prolific with releases like Kaleidoscope. 1998 might be Platypus's biggest year yet. They released Albion aka Ferry Corsten's mega hit Air, which was included on both John Digweed's Global Underground 006 in Sydney, and then also on Paul Oakenfold's Global Underground 007 in New York. And I don't think I've ever seen one track be featured on back-to-back Global Underground mixes. But then it was also featured on compilations like Gatecrasher Global Sound System and Trance Nation 4. There was Conscience's Northern Lights, which appeared on Nick Warren's GU008 in Brazil. And then Art of Trance's Madagascar, which seemed to be included on every trance mix released that year, and you also have Platypus's remix release of Humates 3. 1998 was a huge year indeed, and Platypus would also have a fitting end to the millennium. Often, greatest hits mix compilations don't really work, but don't tell that to Simon Barry. To commemorate Platypus's success, Anthony Pappa was tasked with mixing a Best of Platypus compilation in 1999. The fact that this mix album still remains a favorite of longtime fans to this day just shows how strong of a label Platypus really is. And on top of that, Anthony recently shared that he actually mixed this all on vinyl in one take. What a legend. When trying to understand what makes Platypus such a legendary label, it becomes very similar to the situation at Hooge Tunes. Just as Hooge was Red Jerry's ultimate contribution to the underground, Platipus Records was Simon Barry's ultimate contribution. Before writing this video, I had no idea how prolific Simon Barry was as a producer. I had no idea how many aliases he found success with, and I had no idea how he built Platipus Records around a core group of musicians who would leave a lasting impact on the underground and, of course, the trance sound. And now I'm just so stoked to go back and listen to the entire catalog, so I'd be super appreciative if you could leave your recommendations in the comments. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed this video.